Welcome, Gunrunner.
Hello everybody, Kieran aka the Laird here, and today I have a hardware review for you, and as you can see it is the Game Boy Color, which I acquired quite recently, and I have looked at the original Game Boy on my channel before, which is the one in the background here, this battered old yellowed thing with the horrible screen because it had obviously fallen off and someone had tried to glue it back on, and so all the glue is kind of in the screen. It needs taking off, cleaning and sorting out, but this was donated to me. It's actually given to me by an ex-girlfriend, and I've still got it. It was hers, so I believe it was her who tried to glue the screen back on, and then she blamed it on her brother. It probably was her though, knowing her. She did a lot of silly things like that. But yes, so I have this original old Game Boy, and I have some games here as well that were given to me. And actually, since I did this review, someone donated some weird bootleg games to me. As like this. That's not bootleg. That's a real one. That's Game and Watch Gallery 3. Okay, someone donated some games to me. That was one of them. But in it was actually some bootlegs, like this 32 in 1 Game USA Color Advance. But it's, I assume it's aimed at the Game Boy Color, so actually it's quite good that I've got that, because I didn't have a Game Boy Color. I only had an original. And that's another Game Boy Gallery. That was one of the other ones that was donated to me by somebody. But I have some other bits and pieces down here. Original Game Boy games. That's Super Mario 2, Terminator 2, Judgment Day. So that's the arcade one. That's Judgment Day. I have Bart Simpson's Escape from Camp Deadly, which was one of my younger brother's favourite games actually when he was a kid. So it's quite funny that I have that in Krusty's Super Funhouse. They're ex-girlfriends, I think, because she liked Simpsons. I can't remember what was donated to me now, but certainly those Game Boy Gallery games were, and so was that bootleg, and someone donated me a Tetris as well, so I didn't have a copy of Tetris, weirdly. But yes, this Game Boy Color was quite a good little acquisition. It comes with cannon fodder in there with a nice ripped label, as you can see. It's got a battery in there as well. It looks like, but that's cannon fodder. But the Game Boy itself, the Game Boy Color, isn't in bad condition. It's the see-through one, which I quite like. I really like that design, the clear design. A lot of them are usually in a solid colour. They came in loads and loads of different colours, in fact. Every colour you could probably flip and think of. But I've always thought the clear one looks the coolest, so I'm very pleased to have this in my collection. But basically how this came about was, there was a guy on Facebook Marketplace, and he was basically selling a big box of retro gaming stuff that he just wanted rid of. And it was 150 quid he wanted for it. And in the photo, you couldn't see everything that was there. But what I could make out was an Amiga 500 with a load of games, a couple of boxes of games, a Mega Drive 2 with some Mega Drive 2 games. There was a load of Atari ST games, bizarrely. No Atari ST, but there was some Atari ST games in the box. And there was an NES in there as well with a few games. Weirdly, a few bootleg Famiclone cartridges as well, which is strange. And then right in the bottom of the box, which I couldn't see in the photos, so it was a very nice surprise because it was buried under the stuff, was this Game Boy Color. It was just literally buried at the bottom of the box. So, 150 quid for all that was just like the bargain of the century anyway. But he was moving house, and he actually said to me, "I'm like moving this weekend. I need rid of it so quick. That's why it's so cheap." So I was just really, really lucky. And I'll be looking at the Amiga at some point. Obviously, it was in that box at some point as well, because I didn't have an Amiga 500. I only had a 1200, which I've looked at on the channel previously. But yeah, the Game Boy Color. So here we go. So obviously, the design is pretty similar to the original one. But one reason why I obviously grabbed the original one was obviously because it's kind of a follow-up video. Also, wanted to show a size comparison between the two, because I think it's quite interesting that the Game Boy Color is actually a little bit smaller. Obviously, despite being more powerful, you can see there that it's a little bit wider, and it's not quite as high. So yeah, so it's not quite as wide and not quite as high even. mix up my my words there. So obviously that's straight away noticeable. It's a little bit smaller, although the screen size is exactly the same. You can probably see that there. It's also not quite as thick, and it kind of is at the bottom where the batteries are. You can see it's got this rounded bit that sticks out, whereas the original Game Boy doesn't. The original Game Boy is obviously straight down. At the back, it's fairly similar, apart from now, instead of 4 batteries, obviously, which is what the original Game Boy took, 4 AAs, the Game Boy Color only takes 2 AAs. So it shows how much better technology it got by then, that they could power it off just 2 batteries instead of needing 4. Obviously, you go back to the obviously previous generation of color handhelds before this, which was obviously the Lynx and the Game Gear, and to a lesser extent the TurboGrafx handheld, the Turbo Express, sorry, or PCGT as it was called in Japan. They used 6 AAs and didn't last that long at all. The Lynx, I think, had the best battery life of the 3. The Lynx 2 could get up to 6 hours, more than most people think actually, but obviously still a lot less than the Game Boy, which I think was something stupid like 20 hours or something on a set of AAs. So yeah, I can't remember what the battery life of the Game Boy Color is without looking actually, but it was still pretty decent, despite having a color screen. But it was a lot less powerful than the Lynx, which is worth mentioning because obviously Nintendo took a long time to jump into color because the Game Boy Color didn't arrive until like '98, so very late. And obviously the Lynx was out in '89, the same year as the Game Boy, and the game, the Game Gear and the Lynx had died out by the time the Game Boy Color came along. Um, so it kind of had the market to itself really. It didn't really have any competition until like the Neo Geo Pocket came along really. And then obviously the Game Boy Advance came around at the same time as that actually. So the Game Boy Color didn't really have any competition at all. It was kind of on its own. So it sold really well again, like the Game Boy Color did. But original Game Boy did, sorry. But this console actually wasn't meant to replace the Game Boy. There was actually another handheld, I think it was called Project Atlantis, if I remember rightly, that was meant to replace the Game Boy, which is actually much more similar, very similar in fact, to the Game Boy Advance in terms of the specs and using an ARM chip and things like that. But Nintendo decided against releasing it because they were having a lot of problems with it and went with the simpler Game Boy Color, which is why it's fully backwards compatible and takes the same cartridges and everything. But if you want to actually know more about the machine that was meant to come out to replace the Game Boy, instead of the Game Boy Color, I have done a video on it, as well as some other unreleased Nintendo consoles. So I'll link that down in the description below if you want to know more about that. But what we'll do now is I'll have a little look around the Game Boy a little bit more in terms of what it's got, the Game Boy Color even, and then we'll try and turn it on and have a look at it. And I say try and turn it on and have a look at it because I'm not sure how well it's going to show up. Because I was talking about it being a lot less powerful than the Lynx and indeed the Game Gear actually, for that matter, but more so the Lynx. Obviously, the Lynx was very advanced for its time. Both the Lynx and the Game Gear had backlit screens. The Game Boy Color doesn't have a backlit screen. So you have to be under a bright light in order to see it. And I have got quite a bright window behind me, and I've pulled the curtains open and everything, and so I'm hoping it'll be enough light to show up this screen, because I have tried to have a play with it, but it's really hard to see. In fact, being so used to the Lynx, I was absolutely shocked at just how hard to see and how poor the Game Boy Color screen is. And it makes me wonder how so many people put up with it so easily back in the day. I mean, they could buy those light attachments and stuff that you came on, but they were really bulky and cumbersome. But yeah, so in terms of the around the console itself, so you've got a joypad, which is actually a little bit smaller to the one on the original Game Boy. You see, it's a little bit thinner, but it's the same kind of 4-way D-pad. Obviously, our start and select buttons, which again are a little bit smaller, but doesn't really cause any issues. and A and B buttons. It always annoyed me with Nintendo the way they would be A, not A B. Always annoyed me that. Speakers down there, mono speaker. But obviously you can get stereo sound by connecting headphones. And the headphone jack is now on the bottom, where the DC AC adapter is as well. Was it on the bottom of the original Game Boy? No, just the DC was. That's what I thought. The headphones on the side. I thought it was. I had to think about that for a minute. I don't particularly like it on the bottom. On the links, it was on the top. I suppose mobile phones have it on the bottom. But I always find if a headphone comes out the bottom of it, of anything really, I always tend to catch them on stuff and catch them on the edges of things and pull them, and always end up pulling the headphones out. So I do it on my phone all the time, which is actually one reason why I prefer not having the headphone socket on the bottom, because you tend to do it less if it's not on the bottom. But there we go. I might be alone in that. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm. But yeah, so that's our buttons on the front, all the normal buttons. That on the top there. Infrared or something. Not sure. I'll come back to that in a minute. On-off switch there. Volume and the extension, which is obviously to connect up two together. Okay, so just had to quickly Google that because I thought it was infrared, but I wanted to go and make sure and not give the wrong information. So yes, it is an infrared blaster, it's called. And apparently it had limited multiplayer functionality. So apparently some stuff like Pokemon, you could use it to do trades between yourselves rather than using the link cable. But it had very limited capacity to transmit data. So it couldn't be used to, proper multiplayer. So in a way, it was a little bit pointless. Apparently, it could also be used to control your TV. There was a TV remote control thing you could get. And apparently, Mission Impossible game had that functionality built into it as well, weirdly. You could use it to control your TV. That's kind of cool in a way. And you could annoy your parents by sitting there playing your Game Boy Color and then changing the TV channels. And they wouldn't know the hell why the channels had changed. I think they're going mad, wouldn't they? Probably be quite funny actually. But yeah, that's interesting because the Atari Lynx originally was going to have a sort of infrared instead of its comlinks, but they found it wasn't good enough or reliable enough for using multiplayer, because one problem was that if it got blocked, the beam got blocked, it would cut out straight away. So it was actually deemed to be totally impractical for you doing multiplayer, and they went with the comlinks cables instead. Better idea. Maybe the problem they had with this, but it's interesting they kind of went with that after knowing it hadn't worked before. But yeah, there we go. So that's the infrared blaster. So that's it. On the back, obviously, I've mentioned that it's 2 AAs, and this has still got the label on which shows you what voltage and stuff you need for the AC adapter if you want to use it with an AC adapter. Obviously, 1998 release date, etc., etc. And our normal cartridge slot, like you exactly the same you had on the original Game Boys. So let's turn it on now and see if it does actually show up on this this camera with it. See if it's got enough light, because I have put the game in. So I'm trying to get it. There we go. Actually, it's not too bad, is it? I'm trying to look through the camera at the same time, see if you can see it. Good, the speaker's really quiet. They've actually butchered the War's Never Been So Much Fun song on the Game Boy Color, haven't they? It sounds absolutely terrible. The intro is very, very impressive, I have to say. I didn't realise the Game Boy Color could do something quite as impressive as that, actually. But I don't think this is a game I'm going to be able to play very easy. Oh, look. Select slot is save games, and one of them's called Fuck Off. Yeah. Okay, we'll try that. So what's this barracks house? Oh, so this is totally different to the other cannon fodder then, isn't it? Because you've got missions and that's going to be really hard to play on camera. But we've done that. We've got a nice intro there. Let's try one of these other games to see if what we've got. I want to really try one of those. Where's that bootleg one? That's the one. Because that seems to be like it's designed for Game Boy Color. I'm interested to see if it works as well, more than anything as well. Interestingly, that cartridge sticks out the top a bit more than the official ones. It must be a slightly different size. So how well does that show up on the screen there? International Superstar. Oh, see, it's the International Superstar Soccer, Pro Soccer, Tennis, Castilian, NFL Football, Serpent, World Superstar, New Soccer. God, how many soccer is on there? Football games on there. Super Tennis, Hyper Castilian. So I think they've probably got some of these games are probably repeated. It's probably not even 32 in one. Because it has USA Football, which is probably the same as NFL Football, isn't it? And GB Serpent, you've already got Serpent, God, Superstar, Soccer Master, 2002 Tennis, The Tower. Yeah, it's repeating the games. One of those classics where it's not 32 games at all, it's repeating the games. Look at that. The Castle. Oh, New FL, Super Snake. Oh my God. So yeah, they've just repeated loads of the flipping games, haven't they, on this? So it's not really a 32 in one. They're just bullshitting there, aren't they, with the names. Let's try loading one. There we go. Don't know if this is going to be a colour Game Boy game or a original Game Boy. Looks like it's original Game Boy to me. Yeah. So you do kind of get some limited colour when you're playing these original Game Boy games on some of them. So I pressed the wrong button. So I have to choose one of them, do I? Austria then. I'm not doing very well here. Oh, maybe I've got to press the start button. Wow, that was super lame, wasn't it? Don't know how. I've got to keep moving it. The problem is I can either see it or I can't see it, if you know what I mean. I can either see it through the camera, fine, and not see the screen from my own viewpoint, or the other way around. But let's try resetting that. I don't actually know if any of the games in here are in colour. I mean, the cartridge seems to suggest that it's got some Game Boy Color games on it, but that certainly isn't colour, is it? I know Castilian Tennis is going to be the normal tennis game, isn't it? What is Serpent? I think it's keep pressing the wrong button. I keep thinking it's going to be you have to press start. So yeah, looks like these are all just original Game Boy games. This is basically a Snake game, as you can probably see. So yeah, they've just ripped off the old Snake game. Seems a strange selection of games though to have like these few football games and then like Snake and Castilian. Very strange indeed. But yeah, um, that's it really. I don't think there's much more I need to tell you. I'm sure you'll probably already know what the Game Boy Color's like anyway. I don't want to make a massively long video out of this, but yeah, I can imagine that I would have struggled with this, to be honest, especially if I'd had it after the links where I've been spoiled by having a nice backlit screen, because that screen is so hard to see. And I can't imagine you'd even want to use one of these in the present day unless you can mod that screen, which I assume you can, to get a proper nice new screen that's actually easy to see, because that screen really is really hard to see. In fact, I think it's harder to see than the original Game Boy is. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because the colours make it more reflective or what, but I think it is actually harder to make out than stuff was in the original Game Boy with its simpler graphics. I guess that made a big difference. But the Game Boy Color certainly had a lot of good games available for it, tons in fact. So it's hard to be negative about it, and it is a nice size. It certainly would have fitted in your pocket, unlike my Lynx, which barely fit in a jacket pocket if I was lucky. But there we go. Yeah, that's my look at the Game Boy Color. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon. Bye bye.